Hello, and welcome everybody to another episode of r/ProRevenge. My name's Ryan, the official host here on Reddit Voice, and I look forward to bringing you guys today's top stories. Before I do though, I'd really appreciate it if you could hit that subscribe button, as well as have notifications turned on, that way you could stay up to date with all the latest and the greatest. Several years of harassment caused her to lose a job and her kids. Here is some backstory for you. Several years ago, my mom was dating a nice man with 2 kids. My younger brother and I liked the boyfriend himself, but his kids were another story. His kids were entitled jerks that always got what they wanted, constantly stole our toys, and was generally a nuisance to be around. I always tried to be a better person, but my brother and I were constantly getting into arguments with them due to their pettiness. They weren't even the worst part of the relationship. The boyfriend's ex-wife was. From my perspective, I felt that she was the type of person that if she couldn't have him, nobody could. She made my mother and our lives hell, constantly filing false complaints about our side of the family, generally pointed at my brother and I, from harassment to claiming I had stolen the son's toys, which was the other way around, and going after the boyfriend claiming he was an unfit parent. Several times, she'd try and ruin any plans we had come up with. For example, after spending months planning a trip to New York, last minute she'd blow a fuse and demand we cancel the trip so she could take her own trip with them. We had already gotten a written agreement from her. One time, she even demanded the older son and I visit a family therapist. After pointing all the blame on me, I told my side of the story. It resulted, without the therapist fully implying, that they agreed I was in the right and them storming out of the room. Among many other reasons, even after my mom and her boyfriend had gotten engaged, the ex-wife was one of the biggest reasons why my mom had decided to call off the engagement. The harassment and drama were just too much for us. It broke her heart to do so, but she made us the priority and got us out of the situation. A few years after the breakup, my small family and I were living happy. I never saw the kids or the dude again. My mom had still kept in touch with the former boyfriend, but after some time apart, she's seen the faults in him too. I was in the 8th grade and living life happily. That was until the ex-wife stepped into gym class one day. Apparently, since the breakup, she had gotten her teaching degree and became a substitute teacher. She was now replacing our normal gym teacher who was on maternity leave, as well as acting as the assistant teacher for our health/sex ed class. Basically, I now had to see her pretty much every other day for the rest of the school year. At first, she didn't recognize me. Puberty had hit me hard, changing my appearance drastically, especially for someone who hadn't seen me in like 5 years. Eventually, she recognized my name, and that's when the harassment began anew. All of it was snide remarks about my appearance, constantly pointing me out as an example of what puberty can negatively do to you. Pimples, facial hair, voice cracking, that sort of stuff. To the class as if I was the only one dealing with it. The main health teacher didn't know about it either. Basically everyone in the 8th grade was taking sex ed at the same time. It was technically one extremely large class, but split up into male and female groups. And wasn't I lucky that the ex-wife got the male half? I told my mom about it immediately and she was livid. She sent multiple emails to the school requesting that they switch teachers or at least let me take the online class. It all fell on deaf ears until, with the help of the ex-boyfriend, we showed them dozens of emails, phone calls, and messages all spouting harassment at my family and I. This resulted in her being fired from the school and basically being blacklisted from our school district in the surrounding area. If she wanted another teaching job, she'd have to find it elsewhere. This resulted in a major legal battle between her and the ex-boyfriend because she had tried to move out of state with the kids, but without his nor the court's permission. Apparently, she lost custody of the kids and had to go back to her old job. Don't know what it was, though. All in all, it was an interesting experience. We cut ties with the entire family after the whole ordeal and went on with our lives. I'm now a sophomore in college, waiting out the lockdown in my state. While my mom hasn't had a long-term relationship since then, mostly sticking to online dating, one of them turned out to be a pedo, but that's a story for another day. She's happier than she's been in a long time. I'd just like to make it clear that my mother and I had no real involvement with her losing custody. All we wanted was to get me away from her at school. There was a whole lot of other things that led to that. Her being fired could have just been the last thread. For For those of you wondering, I had mentioned something about a pedo near the end. It's really short. Basically, a few months after the breakup, my mom finds out that this ex, not the ex-fiance in the story, was arrested for trying to sleep with a preteen. Destroy our tree, we'll destroy your driveway. Full disclosure, this happened almost 5 years ago, so my memory of it's a little fuzzy at times. However, the major player here confirmed that it's accurate enough to get the story across, so I'm going with it. It's also kinda lengthy, so there's a TLDR at the end. Background: by North American standards, our house is old. Really old. Older than the town. Hell, it's older than the Confederation. The house was originally built by a merchant from the area like 200 years ago. It's old. With its age comes a very big property line, and apart from a couple adjustments here and there to account for infrastructure and housing development, it's basically unchanged from 100 years ago. Rarely ever comes up here, but in any dispute relating to the property lines, the official town plan takes precedent, and our property line crosses over into our neighbor's property. This will be important later. And now for the two major players in this tale, our a-hole neighbor who we'll call Lumpy. He's the worst. Ran an illegal chop shop in his backyard and seemed to be deathly afraid of trees. He was always taking a 2-week-long vacation in summer, and it was always at the end of July. This part is also important later. The other one is my dad. At the time, he was in government oversight, but before that was in the Department of Justice, and major responsibilities included training Crown attorneys. This included the Attorney General. In the pecking order, Dad was actually pretty low, but the Crown knew and respected him, and they were keenly aware that Dad knew the laws inside and out. If there was anything even remotely resembling a legal dispute, Dad was almost always in the right with his argument. Now we begin our tale. The slight. The line between our yard and Lumpy's was pretty clear. Our side was grass, Protestant lilies, shrubs, and trees. His was a gravel driveway. Before the incident, there was a large Manitoba maple tree growing there. It's very old, but grew in such a way that it blocked just enough sunlight to have a pleasant level of light coming through the window. We had no intentions of ever removing it. Maybe trim it a little if it got too close to the windows. However, some lower branches were sagging onto Lumpy's driveway, so he asked if he could cut down some of the lower branches so that his car wouldn't get damaged when he drove in and out. It was a fair enough request, and he did ask permission first, so we told him to get a landscaper and get a quote, because we sure as hell weren't going to get Lumpy to do it, and we're okay paying for that. A couple of days later, we're on a day trip somewhere and get back to Lumpy coming over, and he tells us not to worry about the landscaper because he took care of it. Red flags were waving at the statement. So we went and checked the tree, and the bastard cut the entire tree down. Then, to add insult to injury, he painted the stump with some sort of weird gray stuff. Don't know what it was, but it had to have been super toxic because nothing ever grew on that stump again. Not even fungi. We're understandably pissed off, but unfortunately there's nothing we can do about it because there's no proof. So now we've got a stump that was once a beautiful tree, a smug neighbor, and seemingly no course of action to take. Dad didn't accept that scenario, and he had a plan. The plan. As I said earlier, Dad knew the law inside and out, so he began to plan things out. He made a few phone calls to the town's civil architect, a couple inspectors, the local landscaper Lumpy was going to get the quote from, and a contractor. He visited City Hall and got a copy of the official town plan, which, remember, is the final word on property lines. He had everything arranged, and now he began to wait. The revenge. Like clockwork, Lumpy went on vacation, and the plan was enacted. Over the course of 2 weeks, we expanded. We rebuilt our fence to new dimensions, rearranged the shrubs, dug up the gravel driveway and put fresh dirt and grass over it, and planted a weeping willow in a spot where, as it grew, would always hang and shed into Lumpy's yard. With the expanded fence and shrubbery, Lumpy's driveway was a small strip of pavement, maybe half a meter wide. The fence placed an old, dying maple and a hawthorn on our side, but because of the two trees growing, it was mostly on Lumpy's side. The key point is the placement of the trunk. That dictates whose property it's on, so it's our tree that he can't touch, no matter how annoying or destructive it is. With the new dimensions, the chop shop he was running was now on our side of the fence, but because it was illegal, it was just scrap metal as far as the lawn was concerned, so we sold it to a local scrapyard. By the time Lumpy came back, our yard had expanded almost 3 meters into his yard. And waiting for him was Dad, the civil architect, and a lawyer with a stack of documents outlining in full detail that what they did was 100% legal and there wasn't a thing he could do about it. TLDR, our a-hole neighbor illegally chopped down our tree, so we legally destroyed his driveway. Edit. Not sure how it happened, but it was supposed to say that we told Lumpy to get the quote and that we'd pay for the landscaper because we didn't want Lumpy to do it himself. Second edit. Aftermath. Lumpy apparently tried to press charges, something along the lines of trespassing or destruction of property, or something ridiculous like that. I had moved out of town at the time, so I don't know what for sure happened, but I'd like to think that the judge threw the case out. Like I said, everything was above board and completely legal. What I do know is that he tore up a part of his lawn and put in a new driveway. He still had room for it, but it also cut his lawn in half, and he had to pay to have the sidewalk adjusted into a ramp. Also, because the town was paying attention now, he had to have done it properly, with like asphalt and stuff, instead of gravel like before. He's also apparently planning to move out and rent the property to others. Third edit. Explanations. Okay, I feel like I need to include a couple of things just to make sure everything relevant is known. Adverse possession. Under Canadian property law, adverse possession takes place after a number of years of continuous, notorious, and open possession. In Ontario, it means that for 10 continuous years, the squatter has to be openly using the land and making no attempt to hide that fact. However, it has to be 20 years before the land can legally be changed over to the squatter's name for absolute ownership. Lumpy had been there for more than 10 years, but less than 20. He could make a possession claim, but not an ownership claim. None of it applied to him anyway for 2 reasons. 1, he openly claimed the driveway and never the backyard. For him to claim part of his backyard we repossessed, we'd have to admit the illegal chop shop's presence. Or he'd have to claim it was a ridiculously large pile of scrap metal. In either case, it would be removed because having either violated a town bylaw. Side note, the fences were moved and the chop shop was on our side. We, being legally obligated, had everything involved hauled away, and used part of the very substantial payment for the metal to pay the fine for having a large pile on our property. Like I said, Dad kept everything above board. 2. In Ontario, under the Land Titles Act, a property owner can convert their ownership to land title ownership. In situations like this, the squatter has to have been using the land in question a minimum of 10 years before the property was converted into a land title. For example, if a property was converted in 1985, the squatter has to have been there since at least 1975 to be able to make a claim. My parents closed on the house in 1993, and Dad made certain that the property was converted to a land title because he immediately had an extension built, and a land title ownership made the paperwork easier somehow. Don't know the details, I'm just a library tech, not a legal expert. My point being that Lumpy would have had to have been using the area since 1983 for him to claim adverse possession, and he moved into his house about 3 years after us. Made the driveway not long after. We didn't care much, the bushes and fence lines were in place long before we moved in, but we also knew that he was using our land if it ever came to that, which it obviously did. TLDR, Lumpy had no legal leg to stand on to make a case for adverse possession. Paying for the tree branches. The original draft stated that we were going to make Lumpy pay for a landscaper to trim the tree. While that was a mistaken sentence on my part, we were under no obligation to acquiesce his request nor pay for it. It's our tree on our land, and we weren't bothered by its presence whatsoever. If Dad wanted to be rude, he could have taken the possession of "you want it done, you pay for it." But he didn't because that would have been rude, legal, and the right course of action, but rude. We decided to get it done because it was a reasonable request, and we're willing to pay a professional to do it because we didn't want Lumpy to do it himself, for retroactively obvious reasons. Lumpy's reaction/fate. I wasn't there at the time, but Dad told me that Lumpy's face was a lovely blend of crimson and puce. and that his general demeanor was a combination of sputtering silent rage and rapidly dying inside. He's still living there and probably can't afford to move out. He retaliates by mowing his lawn as early as he can get away with every day on the dying maple he wanted to cut down but can't now because of the fence that there's a bunch of woodpeckers on. They're nice and loud but oddly soothing in a way. There's also a family of crows building a nest in some of our Engelmann ivy growing on the house. They don't like Lumpy. Bird update, the crows moved elsewhere and a group of blue jays and some whiskey jacks have taken residence there. They don't like anybody. Update, Lumpy has since gotten approval to renovate into a duplex. It's all above board. He even asked Dad for advice to make sure there were no major issues. The relationship was cordial. At least it was until a new event happened. Lumpy and Dad have now joined forces against a new enemy, but it's still an ongoing battle right now. Stay tuned, friends. Update, update, joining forces. They joined forces because of the lot behind us. They used to be housing there, but it was old, decrepit, and burned down years ago, and the land kept getting tossed around between owners. Well, a land developer bought it and got approval through likely shifty methods, but that's just my own intuition, to build an apartment complex. 3 floors, and they have to dig underground parking to maximize tenant space. All of this was done and filed before either Lumpy or my parents were informed. Now, this plan is stupid and won't go anywhere because the engineers will give up when they start digging and hit the Canadian Shield less than 3 feet down. But in the meantime, we still have to deal with the incoming BS. Now, Dad and Lumpy have a plan that's less revenge and more malicious compliance. Maybe petty revenge? Can't really say much else about it right now, though. Final update? So, since the last update, a small pandemic shut the country down. Apparently, the head of the contracting firm and land developer hired was one of the victims. Honestly, I don't know, nor do I care. In any case, the landowners had to hire a company that's significantly less shady than the guys they originally hired. I can't say for certain, but I suspect that the owners were laughed out of the contractor's office. Either way, nobody is building any apartments because they'd never be able to build a legal foundation for it. The owner's stuck with half-hectare of useless land that he can't do anything with to sink the cost of whatever he paid for it. Here's what the revenge would have been. Dad told me that he and Lumpy were basically going to shore up our sides of the back fences and create a scenario where it would fall onto land, creating a huge mess. The reason it would have worked is weakened of those fences, and the 3-foot drop from our land to the empty plot. The fence has needed repairs and shoring up for more than a decade, but we were never allowed to go to that side of the fence to do so. Basically, we'd help the fence break, make it so the fallout spills to their side, and in the eyes of the law, they'd be at fault because Dad and Lumpy did all they were legally allowed to do. I called it a team-up because while Dad has the legal know-how to keep him and Lumpy squeaky clean, Lumpy has contacts including someone who owns a backhoe and tons of clean fill. But again, because of some big ol' pandemic, this is all pointless now. They did it anyway, gotta follow through once you've started. So that's that. And there you have it, folks. The end of our epic tales of ProRevenge. If you liked it, be sure to leave a like on the video as well as subscribe with notifications turned on. That way you could stay up to date with all the latest and the greatest. As always, my name is Ryan, the official host here on Reddit Voice, and I look forward to seeing you guys in the next video.